As part of the Global Compact Network Canada's project on anti-corruption compliance, the experts who drafted chapters in the AntiCorruption ebook have graciously agreed to provide some of their thoughts. And today, we welcome Peter Dent of Deloitte. I'm Jonathan Drimmer. Peter, I want to thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Jonathan.
So, Peter, your chapter in the ebook focuses on tone at the top, and I was intrigued by your using George Orwell's Animal Farm as an analogy to the importance of tone at the top. Why don't you tell us a little bit, in your own words, about the chapter, the lessons that Animal Farm provides to boards and senior executives?
Sure, Jonathan. Nothing erodes tone at the top more than the inequality or the unequal application of accountability within an organization. And so the pigs in Orwell's Animal Farm implemented great policy. All animals are equal on paper, but then almost immediately subverted those policies where all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And applying this to the corporate world and the role of the senior executives and the board, what they need to be cautious about is that as soon as there is unfairness in the application of accountability, then an ethical tone has been undermined within the organization.
It's a terrific analogy, and I think it's obviously a great point about undermining your ethical tone. So let's flip that and talk a little bit about the positive. Why is it important? Why is tone at the top important from an anti-corruption standpoint? And then again, building off of what you just talked about, Peter, in your opinion, what are the key ways a company can set an effective tone?
Sure. And many corruption scandals occur even when the parties involved at the company don't personally benefit from the results of the corruption that was undertaken. The company as a whole might benefit, but in the individual's case, they may not directly, or in many instances, don't directly benefit or receive any gain. So why do they do it? Well, they do it because the corporate reward structure incentivizes success and punishes failure. Basically, they're creating a culture or organizational culture to win at any cost. And in addition, in many countries, corruption is a way of life, not just at work, but in the employees' personal lives as well. So for many of your employees in many jurisdictions, they have to pay a bribe to see a doctor. They have to pay a bribe to get their kids into the schools that they want to get them into. They have to pay a bribe to get the right judicial outcome from a court. So your tone at the top program has to be sufficiently robust to overcome these long-standing practices in many jurisdictions. So that means an inordinate amount of training and reinforcing that training. And it's training that cannot be just given once. It's training that has to be given multiple times in multiple different ways so that your employees understand that it is an extremely important part of the organizational culture to follow these rules around anti-corruption.
So incentivization, training, ensuring that the company's own ethical message is sent regardless of where operations may exist. Critical takeaways, certainly, in setting tone at the top. So then, Peter, we've talked a little bit about the board. We've talked a little bit about the C-suite, about the executive side of corporate life. I mean, how do those differ, the role of the board and the executive in setting the right tone for a company?
Now, the board's role is critical in setting the tone at the top. And one of the most important things that a board does from setting the appropriate tone is the selection and supervision of the CEO. It's critically important. And because the CEO must have the right communication skills, the right character, the right moral fiber, and the appropriate understanding of the uniform application of ethics and standards. And then you go back to the board in terms of the ongoing supervision of the CEO once they're selected. Are they asking enough questions? And the questions that they are asking, are they the right questions? And has the board itself educated itself sufficiently to understand what the responses are and to evaluate the responses coming back from the CEO and senior management to assess that the appropriate tone is being set?
And presumably when we talk about the executive here, we're also talking about compliance personnel, people who would report to committees of the board, such as the audit committee as well.
Well, that's right. Anybody with a direct report to the board should be considered as senior executive or the senior executive team.
And so in the chapter itself, you talk about the importance of recognizing the difference between culture and strategy. And so why is understanding this difference between culture and strategy important in setting the right tone within a company?
It goes back to making sure that you are uniformly applying an accountability framework within the organization. I mean, if the application of the accountability framework is not uniform, then all of the employees of the organization understand that there are two sets of rules in the company. There is the rules for the senior members of the organization, those that are viewed to be more valuable or perceived to be more valuable by senior management, and then there are the rules for everybody else. And if you're not setting a uniform application of your accountability framework, then you're not going to have an effective tone. An ethical culture has to be or must be an underpinning of corporate strategy. It has to be a living, breathing connection between the strategy and ethics, and between them and the reward and incentive structure. So the rewards and incentive structure of an organization must be directly tied both to ethics and quality.
And by reward and incentive structure, presumably you're talking about compensation, promotion, evaluation for leadership roles, those types of things?
That's exactly right.
That's right. And that's how a company helps demonstrate that it's walking the talk on ethics compliance as well.
Right.
So tell us then a little bit about, I know Deloitte has its own anti-corruption program, and so tell us how Deloitte has established its own anti-corruption program and how Deloitte goes about advising clients on their own anti-corruption programs.
Sure. So you're right. Deloitte does have its own anti-corruption program, like any multinational organization. Our own philosophy has evolved over time, and in much the same way that the regulatory expectations of anti-corruption programs have evolved over time. So we look at both what the regulatory outcomes have been from past enforcement actions, but then we also pay attention to what are the risks associated with jurisdictions. And because every jurisdiction in which we operate is in many ways unique. And we advise our clients in much the same way. We advise our clients that they need to pay attention to the regulatory framework, what the regulatory expectations are based on the jurisdictions in which they operate, but they also need to pay attention to the unique variations in how corruption manifests itself in these jurisdictions. So, for example, doing business in Russia from a risk perspective can have different aspects than doing business in China, which is different from doing business in India from a corruption risk standpoint, and so on. So every organization, including Deloitte, needs to spend the time doing due diligence to make your program not only compliance-based from a regulatory standpoint, but also risk-based, taking into account those risks that are unique to each individual jurisdiction.
And that's the approach, obviously, that Deloitte provides in terms of giving advice to companies around the world, focusing on the individual location of operations as well as corporate culture and building compliance out from there, I assume.
Yes, that's right.
It's terrific. Well, Peter, you're one of the experts in the field in Canada. Really appreciate your taking time to join us today to talk about tone at the top, one of the critical areas of anti-corruption compliance. The Anti-Corruption ebook can be found on the website of the Global Compact Network Canada. For information about joining the Global Compact Network Canada, go to www.globalcompact.ca. Any views that have been expressed cannot be attributed to the Global Compact Network Canada, the moderator, or his employer, or any other third party. This recording is the property of the Global Compact Network Canada and cannot be copied, redistributed, or used without the consent of the network. Peter, thanks again so much for sharing your thoughts on Tone at the Top with us today.